It is 6 in the morning on a men's surgical ward in 1955, and a first-year nurse has already worked for an hour. She scrubs, she lifts, she carries. The hospital calls her a student. In truth, she is the ward's labor force, and she is classed as a student so that she need not be paid. They called it training and vocation. It was cheap, governed, disposable work, and almost every rule you are about to hear would put a hospital in front of a tribunal today. There is the tuberculosis ward at number 12, where they sent her in and called the danger good for her. And by the time we reach number 1, you will meet the woman who crossed an ocean for one qualification and was given a lesser one for the color of her skin. Hit the subscribe button. This is a documented record. Number 20, the training allowance. On paper, she was a student, enrolled to learn. On the ward, she was the main pair of hands, doing everything from bedpans to dressings, while the trained staff ran the paperwork. The country's own nursing leaders admitted it. A major report at the start of the decade told hospitals to stop exploiting students as cheap labor and to pay them properly. Her own college argued the opposite, that students should ideally receive an allowance rather than a wage, because what they did was education. So the work was real and the pay was not. Today, a woman doing that job would be a worker, owed a wage for the hours she worked. Then, the label did the arguing. Call her a student, and the wage question went away. Number 19, the pay packet. Living in, a first-year nurse in the early 1950s took home something in the region of 9 to 11 pounds a month. Out of that came what little she could call her own, once the hospital had taken its share for board and lodging. A fully qualified staff nurse, years of training behind her and lives in her hands each night, did not take home a great deal more. The money was not a wage that reflected the work. It was an allowance that reflected how the profession was seen, as a calling a decent woman would do for its own sake. A calling does not need to be paid. That was the theory. She still had to eat. Number 18, the board she could not refuse. She did not choose to live in the nurse's home. The hospital chose for her and then charged her for it. Board and lodging were taken straight out of her pay as what the scales called emoluments, often 100 to 120 pounds of a package worth a little over 200 pounds. She paid the hospital to sleep in the hospital's own building, in a single bedroom off a shared sitting room, whether she wanted to or not. She could not take the money instead and find her own place. The deduction was automatic, and it was compulsory. Today, an employer cannot simply help itself to your wages for a room you never agreed to rent. Then, the accommodation was the job, and the charge for it was gone before the packet reached her hand. Number 17, the exam she paid for. She was the cheap labor that kept the wards running, and she was still expected to reach into her own thin pay for the costs of qualifying, exam fees, travel to sit them, the incidentals of a training the hospital depended on. In the East End, the resentment boiled over. 600 student nurses gathered at one meeting and agreed to hand in their resignations together unless something was done about pay, hours, holidays, and the fees they were carrying. Today, making a worker pay for the mandatory requirements of her own job is the kind of thing a tribunal unwinds. Then, she paid for the privilege of working for almost nothing. Look at the first four together, and a pattern shows through. She was called a student so the wage need not come, and an allowance holder so the deduction could, and then left to fund the rest herself. The word on her file was chosen with care. It was chosen so that the worker on the ward would not count as one. Number 16, the off-duty lecture. The training ran 3 years, and much of the learning was pushed into the hours that were supposed to be hers. Lectures scheduled in off-duty time, study crammed in after a full shift on her feet. The classroom sat inside the hospital's own organization, under the matron, fitted around the work rather than protected from it. She was tired when she learned and tired when she nursed, and the two were never allowed to stop competing. Today, the hours a worker must spend training count as working time, and they are paid. Then, the lesson came out of her rest, and the rest was the only thing she had left to give. Number 15, the split week. A working week of around 48 hours was the baseline, and the shape of it was punishing. Split shifts that broke the day in half. Long stretches of night duty with heavy responsibility and little relief. Off duty that could not be predicted from one week to the next. There was no floor under her rest, because no law yet said there had to be one. Today, a hospital has to respect limits on the hours it works a nurse, and has to give her breaks and time to recover between shifts. Then, the rota was whatever the ward needed it to be, and what the ward needed was all of her. Number 14, the notice she never got. A day off was not a promise. It was a plan the hospital could cancel at a minute's notice, whenever the ward was short or a crisis broke. Shifts changed the same way, announced rather than agreed, with no warning she could rely on and no way to plan a life around them. She could make no arrangement for her own time that the ward could not overturn by the afternoon. Today, that kind of last-second control runs straight into the rules on rest, on notice, on the basic predictability a worker is owed. Then, her time was the ward's to spend, and it spent it without asking. Number 13, the lift. There were no hoists in any real sense. A heavy patient was turned, raised, and moved by hand, many times a shift, by young women doing it with their own backs. The techniques the hospitals taught were the techniques that wrecked spines, and when a back gave way, the answer was that it came with the job. Some were told, in as many words, to find a different career. The injury was not treated as the hospital's failure. It was treated as the nurse's bad luck. Today, an employer has a legal duty to assess that lifting and to prevent that harm, with equipment and with limits. Then, the equipment was her, and when she wore out, another young woman took the weight. Number 12, the fever ward. Tuberculosis was still filling wards and sanatoria, and the nurses sent to staff them were sent in close, for long hours, with little between them and the disease. Worse, the risk was not hidden, but waved away. For years, the accepted wisdom held that catching a mild infection early was almost good for a nurse, that it would harden her against worse to come. Study after study showed that student nurses were among the most likely of all to be infected. She was young, she was cheap, and she was sent toward the very thing everyone knew could kill her. Today, that is an occupational exposure an employer is bound to control, to test for, to guard against. Then, the danger was reframed as a favor, and she was told to be grateful for the immunity it might leave behind. Number 11, the ward at night. One young nurse, sometimes barely a year into training, could be left in charge of a Nightingale ward of 40 to 44 beds through the night. Down the corridor, 2 trained nurses might be covering 10 wards between them, appearing for a round and gone again. If something went wrong, and on a ward that size it did, she met it alone. One nurse recalled being put on nights on a 40-bed ward and losing 3 patients before morning, herself still only a second year. The responsibility was real, the training was thin, and the cover was a rumor. Today that staffing would be called unsafe, and the harm that followed would land at the hospital's door. Then, it was simply how the nights were run. These were not accidents waiting to happen. Someone wrote the rota that split her sleep. Someone stalked the ward that left her alone. Someone sent her toward the fever, knowing what it did. The hospital did not stumble into the danger. It arranged the danger, signed it off, and called it the ordinary shape of the work. Number 10, the closed door on organizing. When nurses tried to push back, the ground shifted under them. Pressing for better pay or hours was not a safe thing to do, when your job, your training, and the roof over your head all belonged to the same institution. And the argument used against them was not about money at all. Nursing was a calling, they were told. a vocation a good woman took up for love, and a calling did not haggle. The framing did quiet work. It turned a fair claim for wages into something faintly shameful. Today, a worker who organizes over pay and conditions is protected from being punished for it. Then, the punishment was easy, and the protection did not exist. Number 9. The dismissal at will. A probationer held her place on sufferance. She could be sanctioned or quietly asked to resign over things that had nothing to do with her nursing. A cigarette, a missed curfew, a man found in her room. Her conduct, her manners, even her morals were the matrons to police, and falling short could end the career with no hearing and no appeal. The standard was not whether she could nurse. It was whether she behaved as the institution wished a nurse to behave, awake and asleep. Today, none of that survives a tribunal, not the reach into her private life, and not the sacking without process. Then, the door out was always ajar, and the hospital's hand was always near it. Number 8. The vetted engagement. If a nurse wished to marry, the matron expected to be told, and expected to weigh in on the man. His suitability was treated as the hospital's business, and once she married, she was expected to give up hospital work altogether, as though a wedding ring and award could not share the same woman. If she fell pregnant, there was nothing to manage at all. She was removed. The formal marriage bar had eased in the previous decade, but the live-in world and its customs pushed married women out just the same. Today, dismissing a woman for marrying or for being pregnant is discrimination, and losing a job for pregnancy is automatically unfair. Then the ring was a resignation, and the pregnancy was a departure already written. Everything so far could land on any nurse in any home county. What comes now was rationed out by birthplace and by color. Britain had called its colonies the mother country and asked their daughters to come and nurse. They came, and the welcome, it turned out, had been measured in advance and set low. Number 7, the binding contract. The recruitment was organized and deliberate. Advertisements went out across the Caribbean, and later a formal call went to 16 colonies and former colonies inviting women to come and staff the new health service. But the invitation came with a string. Recruits were commonly signed to contracts of around 3 years before they ever boarded the ship, bound to the placement chosen for them, an ocean from home and in no position to walk away. She had crossed the world on a promise, and the promise held her in place. Today, tying a migrant worker to an employer like that sits squarely inside the law's concern with coercion and exploitation. Then, it was simply the deal, and the deal was not written in her favor. Number 6, the harassment with no recourse. A black nurse met hostility from 2 directions, from colleagues beside her and from patients in the beds she tended. There were the muttered insults, the refusals to be touched by her, the daily reminders that she was not wanted where she stood. And there was nowhere to take it. No complaints procedure, no protection written into her employment, no law that named what was happening to her and told it to stop. She absorbed it, shift after shift, because absorbing it was the only option on offer. Today, that treatment is unlawful harassment, and the silence around it would be the employer's liability. Then, the abuse was hers to carry, and carrying it quietly was expected of her too. Number 5, the promotion ceiling. Look up the ranks of a 1950s hospital, and the senior posts, the ward sisters, the nursing officers, were held almost entirely by white British women. Black nurses were welcome at the bedside and rare above it. The latter existed, but for them it had a rung near the top that few were allowed to pass. And on the rare occasion a black nurse did rise, she found the resentment waiting, the muttered complaint that people like her had no business giving orders. Today, holding a worker back from promotion because of her race is discrimination a court will name and price. Then the ceiling was unspoken, unwritten, and perfectly solid. Number 4. The domestic apprenticeship. Many Caribbean women who came to nurse were not allowed to nurse, not at first. They were taken on as porters, as orderlies, as cleaners, and left there. In some places, it took around 4 years of proving themselves in the lowest jobs before they were even considered for training. White recruits walked in and began. They waited, doing the work no one else wanted, for the right to start the work they had come for. Today, making one group serve years of menial labor for an opportunity handed freely to another is textbook race discrimination. Then it was called proving herself, as though the doubt were reasonable and the delay were hers to earn. Number 3, the ward nobody wanted. Placements were not handed out evenly. The general and teaching hospitals, the prestigious training, the busy acute wards went largely to white British women. Black nurses were steered toward the chronic sick wards, the geriatric wards, the tuberculosis hospitals, and the psychiatric institutions, the hardest and least valued corners of the service, the places short of staff because few chose them. It was not stated as a rule. It did not need to be. The sorting happened quietly at the point of allocation, and it happened again and again. Today, routing workers into the worst posts by race is discrimination in plain sight. Then, it was administration, and administration left no fingerprints. Number 2, the quota. This one was written down. In 1949, a government memo recorded a working assumption that the sensibilities of patients set a limit on how many, in its words, colored workers a hospital could employ as nurses, a ceiling on black staff, justified by imagined objections from the beds. It was not the only one. Some trade unionists pressed for quotas of their own to keep the numbers down, so the woman who came to serve found that a figure had been set for her before she arrived, a maximum tolerance expressed as a fraction of a ward. Today, a document like that is the discrimination case, quoted back in court. Then, it was policy, filed and forgotten, doing its work in the dark. Number 1, the lower pathway. She came for one qualification and was quietly given another. Britain's own registered nursing qualification, the SRN, was the one recognized around the world, the one that would let her go home and build a career on it. That was what she crossed the ocean for. But the training carried a second, lesser tier, the enrolled nurse, shorter, narrower, and worth little outside Britain. And Caribbean women were funneled into it, signed onto the lower course, often without the difference explained to them, for no reason but the color of their skin. Many had the ability for the higher path and were never offered it. She did the work, gave the years, and earned a certificate that meant something in England and almost nothing at home, closing the very door she had come to open. Today, that sorting by race would be named for what it was and answered for. Then, it was simply how she was placed, and no one had to say why. Her name was Louise da Cocodia. She sailed from Jamaica in 1955, answering the mother country's call, and trained at a London hospital, signed onto the lower course with the difference never explained. She met the racism from colleagues and from patients, qualified as a registered nurse in 1958, and gave the health service 31 years, rising in the end to become the first black senior nursing officer in her city, where she still heard that her sort had no business giving orders. The matrons and the boards who built these rules were not monsters. They were applying the accepted practice of their day, and that is how it almost always works. But it was all written down. It sits in the Whitley pay scales, in the debates in Parliament, in that 1949 memo about the number a ward could tolerate, in the oral histories the nurses left behind, the wage that was not a wage, the fever ward called a favor, the qualification handed out by color. They called it a calling, and they called Britain her mother country. Did a woman in your family nurse in years like these? Tell me what she was never allowed to do.